Hi.
There it is. Hi.
Very
How
well. Thanks a
goes?
lot for being with us tonight. I
Thank you
I
for the
was
invite.
trying to think about how long it's been that you have been, running and being a part of the scene in Toronto. Decades now. Um, where did it all start for you? What was your bite for electronic music?
All right, so let's see if I can encapsulate this. I am a child of punk rock and goth and dub music and CFNY and Brave New Waves. CFNY pre CN Tower until it went to the Tower. So basically, new wave, dub, punk, all that kind of sound mashed up. And then I came to Toronto in '86. I started studying at Ryerson very deliberately because I was already interested in CKLN, the community station there. And being part of that station, I got involved with it in '87, and a whole world, literally, of other music exploded. And I'd already been kind of messing around with DJing my high school dances and stuff. And then I came to the city, and with doing CKLN and having access to studios, I got to make demos. I got to be out in the clubs and started DJing in '87. And like I said, punk rock, new wave, dub, reggae, hip hop was starting to happen. There's all these things. And I also discovered house music. And it was just like the beginning of kind of underground house. And all of these sounds were colliding, late '80s. And I was very, very lucky. I feel like that time period was just so ripe. So there's so much, cross pollination is maybe an overused term, but electronic music at that time was exploding on so many fronts and everything was influencing everything, but it was small enough as a series of worlds, a series of connected worlds to kind of discover and really delve in. So I would say, dub, reggae, hip hop, punk, funk, all of that stuff fed into discovering house. And also, what was happening in the UK is they were discovering early techno and house too, and feeding off of the Americans. So what was happening on XL Records and what was happening in the record stores in Toronto, it was an explosion of so many different things, and I was just soaking it all up late '80s and then
What do
into
you
early
think the
'90s.
fuel was for that moment? That was what was it that made all of that explosion seem to happen at once?
Gear for a start, people had access to rhythm boxes, drum machines. Um, People, I would say, new wave music for sure. New because of the synthesizer, right? Like synthesized sounds, suddenly the electronic components became accessible, and it became accessible as things that you could buy and make music on, hear music in a different way. And it became accessible in the records you could buy, in the stuff that you were hearing on the radio. So all around you, literally, were these. I hate to use the phrase "brave new worlds," but I'm gonna. You could soak it in, and just your head could go in so many directions. It was a real privilege to be soaking that in and seeing the ways it moved out of your
What
brain.
was the exposure like? Like, how was it that the discovery was happening? Not just for you, but just, I guess, en masse. In Toronto, more specifically, was there a culture center that this seemed to emanate from?
Okay, so I'm gonna, because we're talking early, I can only talk from my experience, and then I can kind of assess, what came after or what I saw coming after. But from my own experience, I mean, the two biggest influences literally were CBC's Brave New Waves. I literally in high school would stay up all night, or I'd set cassette decks to record, and two decks in a row, so I'd have like two cassettes recording every night after I went to sleep at 3 in the morning, whatever. What was happening on that show was nothing short of revolutionary. And CFNY at that time as well, with your Marsdens and your Don Burns and people who came over the course of the core decade of CFNY is truly the spirit of radio. There was just, it was all experimentation, and let alone that was just my little pocket of the world, right? Southern Ontario, or in the case of Brave New Waves, Canada. But then for me, again, personally speaking, moving to Toronto in '87, and then going to alternative clubs like Domino's and Nuts and Bolts, and hearing that weirdo electronic new wave take on things. But also, people were starting to incorporate house and techno, and Detroit techno was starting to happen. Um, Stumbling around and discovering kind of all night clubs that really weren't on my radar necessarily, and unless I stumbled in them, and then meeting people who started taking me in probably early, like, well, early 90s to warehouse parties in Toronto, which were, you know, I can describe them to this day. I forget what happened yesterday, but I can tell you about so many warehouse parties I
Does
went
that
to
mean that
early
you
on.
did it right?
And same
Did
thing.
you do it right if you're able to still describe them in detail?
Well, depends on if you're talking coded. I actually, back in those days, my early days, I actually was not, uh, drugs and alcohol were not my thing. I didn't come to those until later into my career. But I did it right in the sense that I walked into rooms and I soaked in the music, and my mind was literally blown at being in rooms with people that I'd never met, who we'd hear music, we'd be smiling at each other, you'd start dancing with strangers, literally, which all sounds like naive and amazing, and of course that happens and whatever. Back then it didn't. Back then, communities were separated. You know, music truly brings people together, and it's a cliche, but man, it's true. And that's what, with warehouse parties, and then the beginning of rave in Toronto, the early '90s with 23 Hop, what became 23 Hop, and exploded from there. Wednesdays at Cameron with
Mark
um,
Oliver?
you know yeah, well, with Mark, but also with Malik before Mark Oliver, Malik X, who was doing a show on CKLN, and who kind of passed the torch over, and Malik and Dr. No, and like all those guys were coming together. They were all so influential at 23 Hop and the Cameron, and the other little pockets of places. But the thing, as you mark what was happening in Toronto, that made a really notable difference was just when you saw the mix of people coming together and being, and we were collectively having our minds blown. Drugs, no drugs, whatever. We were having our minds
What was
blown.
the record store scenario for you? Was this the only way to get a hold of this music? I mean, were you a part of a specific mailing list? I mean, this is early on, before you really started, becoming, the awesome Denise Benson. I mean, what was your play like? How were you coming across the gems?
Radio, radio, radio. Again, I was like, by '87, I was starting to do a show at CKLN, and then I continued to program at CKLN for more than 2 decades. So I can't overstate how much of an influence that was. Going out all the time. When I was in school, I was literally out 5, 6 nights a week dancing. Um, but yeah, record pools. I mean, once I was DJing and once I had established a bit of a rep, I was playing out 5 nights a week at first for a while at clubs like Showbiz and the early Nuts and Bolts and other places. And so yeah, there were record pools, there was radio, there was obviously hearing other DJs play. But that's the thing about clubs that, this is a whole other tangent and we could talk about this forever, but clubs literally used to be where people would discover music. They would come out because they wanted to hear something new, not because they wanted to hear what they already could hear on the radio, right? So clubs were a big, big part of that. Record pools and the stores. Yes, the stores. And at that time in Toronto, so we're talking late '80s into the early '90s, we had Star Sound, we had Trax, we had Carnival, and we had Play D that opened in the early '90s. Some of those overlapped, and some of those, took over each other's spaces and stuff. But the underground, the dance music record stores in the city, we were super lucky because the people working there all knew what was up. They all knew to say, "Hey, check this, check the house, techno, weirdo stuff." Um, Everybody kind of had open ears, and when you didn't have like hundreds of labels releasing stuff every week, when it was literally dozens, you could truly explore. You could, I mean, I'd go in weekly and I'd always listen to a stack at least this big, because I'm trying to fit into your window. Because there was that much to check out. And without the stores to guide us and the people that the stores hired to guide us, would have been a very different scenario.
Do you think that the accessibility of what's current right now for anyone, not just the DJ, has changed the way that people view music? Is it still special? Does the magic still there because the accessibility has changed so dramatically?
I'd almost break that into different categories. I mean, I think that I'll answer from the negative first because I always prefer the positive. So,
Me
I'll
too.
talk more about that. Yeah, I know. That's one of the things I
Cheers.
love about you. Um, the negative side of the accessibility now is that I almost feel like you have to work harder, right? Like you actually kind of have to work harder. It's ironic because there's so much more out there, but I almost find like people kind of shut down. They get into their little closets, and it's not even rooms, it's closets. It's a particular sound or genre, or maybe, they're into a couple of them, or they'll get into a label, or they get into an artist, or, I listen to this, and it's subcategory and upon subcategory. Or, the thing that drives me more crazy is the people who, in club settings, make requests for they only want to hear what they hear on commercial radio. I'm like, I don't get that. You can literally hear any sound, any sound you can think of or discover from around the world, and you want to hear what you already know. What is that? On the other hand, okay, maybe it's overload. Um, but I think when you are faced earlier on with this sense of discovery, also pre-internet, right? We haven't even said that, but pre-internet, when you had to work a little harder, but it was also more face-to-face. So it was in the club, it was in the record store, it was talking to your friends, it was, whatever the case may be, making mixtapes, sharing mixtapes. Like it was a more kind of hands-on, visceral experience, and maybe we felt more connected to it in a way. Maybe it was more like that sense of discovery. Same thing. I mean, as you hear people now reminiscing about going out to raves, that's part of what they're reminiscing about is hearing people play very different sounds or having their minds blown by hearing things that were completely different. That feels different now, but on the other hand, the way pop music feeds everything now, I think is really interesting, right? So I think there's a flip side to it, which is pop music is hip hop music, is melodic chords, is like this, whether it's EDM or it's big heavy chords, and I think it's interesting what people can do with that too. So no matter what positive or negative you have to this discussion, you can kind of veer off in different directions with it.
What did you want to do when you first started throwing parties? Was there a mission that you had in mind? Because when this is I'm guessing 95, 96 when you really started getting into promotion. Is my timeline right or is it off?
Okay, so let me see if I can do my own timeline. So I started playing out in clubs late 80s. By, yeah, mid 90s, or even early 90s, I'd done, like, as a DJ, I've always kind of had a weekly residency or a couple of them. So my mission, to go back to the core part of your question,
I'm trying to get to Cherry Bomb.
oh, the cherry bomb.
That's what
Okay,
I mean, the
I can give
residencies
you
aside,
a
I'm
direct
talking about
link.
the thing. I'm not saying the residencies isn't interesting. It's interesting, but I want to talk about also like how is it that you got into throwing parties? What was inside you
Okay,
when that was happening? Like was it what was the goal as a promoter? That obviously different as a DJ.
all right. So I'll tell you the thoroughfare, apart from loving music, is being a queer woman who came out, started going out to lesbian clubs and being like, uh, this is not me musically. This is like, and then I'd go to alternative clubs and I'd be like, if I stare at some guy's girlfriend too long, am I going to be in trouble? You know, because the worlds were kind of separate at that time, right? So if you're looking for like a really honest beginning, it was like to do something interesting for women because that's what I wanted. That's so and that takes you directly to Cherry Bomb, because I did a bunch of nights for queer women or mixed queer crowds that some of which I'm particularly proud of, like Dyke Night at the Caribou, uh, Thursday nights, which was like where Sneaky D's is now on College Street. Totally amazing. Like I will toot my own horn there. Continued it through a few venues to the Boom Boom Room where we did that for a while. I did a number of different queer nights for women and mixed nights and so on. But landing on Cherry Bomb, when Cosmic Cat and I launched that now a little over 10 years ago, I think it's 2017 or 2007. Time. Um, same thing, right? Same thing is she and I had done lots of different nights for queer, straight, mixed crowds, whomever, about the music. But often when you're doing nights for queer crowds, because those crowds come together out of queerness and wanting to find other queer people, they're not necessarily listening to the same sounds. It's not like the same as doing, future jazz night or a trip hop and drum and bass night or a house night or a techno night because people come together around that music. When you're doing queer nights, you're bringing people together and you're trying to help them meld through music. And it's a challenge. And to do queer nights that allow you to be who you are musically and connect people and still be cognizant of the fact that a lot of those people like what's on the radio or like different sounds from each other. It's also a challenge as a DJ. And you, as somebody who bounces up and down every time he plays, and still watches the crowd, you're a crowd pleaser. You know what I'm saying? It's like doing those kind of nights where you want to play for you and connect the crowd. They're a challenge, and some nights that challenge is really interesting and fun because you do it, and other nights you're like, you know.
Was it a form of competition for attention within yourself, being a promoter, wearing that hat, and then also having to step up and perform as well? Did you ever feel that perhaps these two roles somehow one was being more strong that night than the other, and you couldn't find the balance? Was that ever a thing for you?
I've never, I mean, I think because my entire career I've been promoter and DJ, I've never seen a conflict there. Um, it's always been more about what is what is going to work right now. Where I've seen bigger separations for me personally is between the passion for what I write about, which is a whole nother thing, right? I started chronicling what was happening in Toronto's electronic
I
music
want to talk
scene
about it.
in the early 90s, right? So writing about it, talking about what was happening, whether it was, go, these are the parties, go to those things, or writing more in-depth pieces, and then what I was doing. There's, for me, more of a division there because of the often different worlds. But promoting and DJing, that's what I've always done. I've done both the whole time I've been playing. You had to when you like literally in late 80s and beyond. I mean, yeah, sure, some of those house DJs had the warehouse promoters who were promoting, but you wouldn't have Dino and Terry or Peter Tyrone and Shams or Nick Holder or any of those people who brought early sounds without a promoter, but also without them being able to promote. You just couldn't. You had to promote.
What were you doing 10, 15 years ago for promotion? But this is pre-internet, pre-Facebook. What was
I think we have to go back more than
I
15 years, don't we, to be
I mean I
pre-internet
mean
at this point,
internet
Josh?
internet was happening. There was a form of action that was going on. I mean, I try to think to myself, 2006 was when I really felt that the internet was really exploding, not just for music, but just as a thing where it became part of life. Yeah, there was internet before that, but most people
Yeah,
didn't have the computer at home. If they had the computer, they didn't have the modem, or they weren't hooked up, or
right.
it was something. It's not like what it is today, where we're totally cyborgs, all of us. I'm thinking, I'm thinking. So yeah. So what was the action 2002, for example? What was the
In terms of
move?
spreading word,
Yeah. What were you doing?
flyer, 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 man.
Were you 2 feet in a heartbeat? Were you out on the street on your own and hustling?
You know, to an extent, yes, but to an extent, no. I mean, I've never been the best hustler. I'm not as shy as I used to be, so I've gotten over that. But I've never been the best at handing out my own flyers. Hey, come see me. you know, it's always felt weird. But would I spend lots of time wandering the entire city, putting flyers in stores, thinking about where to do listings, send press releases? I mean, admittedly, I've been super lucky in that media before I was a part of it was interested in my story, and that's part of being a woman DJ on the scene because there were so few of us at that time. Definitely part of being a queer woman on the scene, so I could make a mark just by being who I was, doing what I did, and being different. And there was some attention paid, and definitely I could connect with communities because our communities were starving for things for us, by us. Um, so that's a bit different than your dudes out there starting a house night or whatever, right? Um, to an extent, depending on who they are. Um, but yeah, I did the flyering. I did the press releases. I was out there. I was making mixes. I was talking to people. I was, doing my own radio show, but also talking on other people's radio shows. It was all those things and more. Like once upon a time, we used to actually send listings to the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail and things that you would never think would cover those things, but they were because at that time they were kind of groundbreaking. And we had weeklies. We had not only Now Magazine, which is the only one that still exists, but I Weekly, which is who I wrote for a long time. And then we had, of course, Tribe Magazine. We had Club Life Magazine. We had Peace Magazine. We had all these different things happening in the city. Brave New Waves was a national show, but they would cover a lot of what was happening in the underground of different cities. I mean, everybody was plugged in and wanting to support what was happening in our cities, but also nationally, because it was so new and people needed to be tapped in, and everybody was excited to uncover new sounds, new talent, new DJs, new producers, new labels, right? Like we were all kind of working together, even if separately.
Can we talk a little bit about the chronicling, the writing that you have done? Because this to me is truly awesome. Amongst all the other accomplishments that you've gone through as well, the writing is something that I find that there's just not a lot of. So when you do encounter it, it becomes really awesome. Recently, I just discovered that someone created a coloring book of all the Chicago house DJs.
Cool.
And I thought to myself, this is truly amazing, right? Like, it's this type of stuff because Rolling Stone seems to be a great chronicler of everything that's happened with rock and then I guess eventually pop music. And maybe Mix Mag and DJ Mag has done some of it, but I'm not quite sure. I don't know if I feel that the documentation has been thorough. I mean, and when it be is there a highlight towards it? Is there ever a recall towards it? Who does the recall? And you've done an incredible amount of recall for Toronto and what's happened here. So I guess the big question is, what fueled that? Why did you put pen to paper?
So, I mean, starting at my core answer to that is that I've literally always been about words and music as an individual on the planet. I've always been into writing. I've always been into music. Makes sense. How that came to be here, early on, I started writing for Exclaim magazine, which is a national music magazine. Um, Initially, especially known a lot more for its indie rock coverage, but I mean, literally indie rock to experimental jazz to hip hop to whatever. Exclaim covers music, period. So I wrote for them, and then through doing my show, which was called Mental Chatter on CKLN for a long time, between that and writing for Exclaim, I got invited to do a column at iWeekly, and I did a couple of different columns there. I did one called Extended Play, which I called it that because it was a deep dive. It was more interview based. So I do profiles of everyone from like, Detroit techno people to local people. They were like interview based, and these are the people to watch out for. And it was usually about people who were playing a party that particular week. So it was a deep dive into who they were and what they were about. And then I did a series called Beats Per Week, which was kind of like, go check these parties. This is a quick highlight of who's playing there. And that was like, especially during the years when our rave scene was insane and you'd have, 4, 5, 10,000 plus people parties on a weekend, trying to do these listings and then also cover the underground, like what was happening at Element or wherever, right? Like Toronto has been blessed. I mean, it's interesting. I'm going to go off on a tangent because that's what I do. But, I've spoken and had a number of panels where people will say things, younger people will say things like, I hear that once upon a time there was like some area in Toronto called the Entertainment District where there are all these clubs. And I'm like, yeah, yeah, there was a ton of clubs, but you don't really want to know about that. Those, whatever, those clubs were whatever. But you know what? For those people, those clubs were not for whatever because there were that many clubs in Toronto at that time. And we could have that many, to me, mainstream clubs, as well as the underground clubs, the smaller rooms, and the raves, the small raves, the medium raves, the huge raves. Like, we were so blessed in the city with how much we had going on. So, yes, I was chronicling that. And yes, I'm still passionate about it, clearly. Because what was happening here, even though you can never say there is a Toronto sound, which is what so many people want to do about a specific city. Oh, what's the Chicago sound, the New York sound, what's the Toronto sound? And almost as though if you can't list it, it's insignificant. Nah, it's not. The fact that we had so many sounds here feeding into each other and continue to, I think, is an accomplishment. So what I was doing was chronicling all of that, from the names of people at parties to like hints of where to go to without exposing locations and doing in-depth interviews and stuff. Again, very lucky. I was very lucky to be given that opportunity, but also I feel like very lucky to be part of the city and just how much was happening here at that time.
Do you think that um, there was something in the water for Toronto with music that happened? Because you're right. I agree with you. The explosion was, it seemed to happen with every genre has had a taste of something that's been recognized somewhere else.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Somewhere else often is the key phrase.
Listen, it's. I think every hometown has a tough time celebrating their own heroes.
True, true. Yeah, yeah.
Dance music has had an incredible amount of ebb and flow for popularity in Toronto. It's been a thing that has, I guess, been marked sometimes by venues.
Hmm.
There was a situation with Mayor Mel Lastman in Toronto, and that had iDance as a result. It seems like there's been some starts and some stops. Um, Now is probably the biggest stop ever, and it's not like any of us were doing something. This didn't happen because someone got hurt at a function or an event. This didn't happen because perhaps popularity on the genre was starting to wane. This happened because of something else. How do you feel? Like where is dance music now as a feel for people? Are people dancing at home? Do you think?
So I will say straight up that the thing I listen to most, I'm a radio person forevermore, and I listen to BBC Six Music more than I listen to anything else. So that is part of my gauge, and England is different here than here, but England has, and the UK as a whole, have influenced so much of what happens here, alongside with obviously Detroit, New York, Chicago in particular. Um, but yeah, if you listen to whether it's Six Music or anything else where there's kind of live interaction, probably such as your own show, um, you get a sense. Yeah, I mean, we're people are personally connected to this music. It's not going anywhere. Dance music may change, all of it's 4/4, but it may change. The emphasis on the bass, or like what kind of stabs, or thankfully it's not all like build to drops, and it's always going to morph. It's always going to feed into itself. It's always going to change. It's, I mean, dance music is electronic music, is music, period. So where people take that will range from, it's not even generation to generation necessarily. It's because it's constantly moving. It's changing every 2-3 years fairly significantly, but people's interest in it is not. And so yeah, of course people are dancing, whether it's in our own bedrooms now, or I think as someone who, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, particularly as we get older, we're like, yeah, I'm gonna go to that party. Oh man, it's so hard to leave my house, But when COVID's fucking over, we're all going out. We're, whether
Is
we have to get.
are we headed straight for the hugest, the greatest party ever raved
Mm,
ever in the history of raving? Is that what we're heading towards?
I'd say the greatest series of parties, because we all still have different tastes in sound, but also size of room we want to be in, or communities we want to be in, all that stuff. But yeah, I think what COVID is teaching us, so many things, um, but is also like, find your community, find the things that make you happy, and look forward to rediscovering them. And whether you're helping to create them or participating and bringing energy that way, I mean, we all are gonna go out and reconnect on a dance floor, because for anybody who loves this music and loves dancing, that's one of the things. you know I How do you even describe what a hole in our lives it is now, as DJs, as promoters, as music lovers, as people who just like to be out? How do you do, like, the fact that we can't go anywhere? I mean, there's the fact that I can't take my kid anywhere but a park, right? Like literally anywhere but a park, and we can't find, like, what, there's nowhere to take kids. There's nowhere to take ourselves either.
What do you think it's going to look like when we're able to, all of us, when we're all able to? What's this going to look like? Because uh, this time has affected people in so many different ways.
Hmm.
And for some, obviously not so well, especially if you're operating a venue. Some of the venues are now, they're no longer. Where are people going to go dance? Will stuff go back to pop-up spaces?
Okay, so we could veer off into a whole discussion about Toronto and spaces, which I think is one of the most important discussions to have at this point in history, especially pre-COVID and then post-COVID. But talking to what you just said in a utopian kind of way, my biggest fantasy, I actually, I texted Cosmic Cat the other day, and I'm like, Happy New Year. My biggest fantasy right now is throwing a massive free outdoor cherry bomb somewhere, legal, because who wants the hassle anymore? But just, to bring people together. I think that's, if you're a music lover, a DJ, a promoter, yeah, I mean, man, we've all been hurting. None of us have had a proper income, and it's approaching a year. It sucks, but my biggest instinct, and I know I'm not alone, is to just want to throw a party and bring people together once we're allowed to be together safely, physically, again.
Is this now what I was asking, going back to my earlier question, where did you ever feel that when you were doing your shows that there be the promoter hat that you were wearing and then the DJ hat as well that you were wearing, and that one was stronger than the other during that night? Right,
Nah,
right,
if I was a
right
better
now,
promoter,
what
maybe
it
I'd care more about money, but you know, I care mostly about music and people, so so no, it's never felt like a conflict. I mean, yes, there are nights where you're like, God damn, we worked so hard for this one. We gave our everything. We charged so little for this, and yet, there as a promoter, for sure, you have nights where you're like, how did this happen? Or you feel like, how did how are these the people that ended up here who don't care about the music we're playing? Or, you can have conflicts for sure between your creative brain and your bring people together brain, but for me, they come from the same place. So
What about a standout moment for you? Was there a highlight that you could think about in a show that was here in Toronto that was so explosive that you were like, I don't know how the hell I'm coming back down from this. I am absolutely elevated.
I think if we as DJs didn't have those somewhat regularly, we probably wouldn't keep at it. There are some that are bigger than others, but there are nights where you go into a club and you're like dragging your ass and you're like not feeling 100%. And you're just like tired and whatever. And you're like, oh, I don't, whatever. And then those nights suddenly, people come in and they start dancing early and it pops off and you actually get to play what you love. And, so that might be 100, 200 people, but you're brought back to you. So, or you feel like you really connected with people. So there are those nights. There are also the nights like, you mentioned Cherry Bomb earlier, and some of our Cherry Bomb Pride parties have been like insane. And
I've been to a few of them. I could say that is true.
and yeah, of course you go home and you're like, okay, I can't sleep now. I can't sleep now. But again, it doesn't matter necessarily the size. It's what you got to connect with and how pumped you got during your event. And I don't necessarily dance all night during my sets like you do, but the nights I do, chances are I'm not sleeping when I go home.
Is it this high that that's acquired during the performance? That's the chase. Is it is it the new music that you could share, that which is the excitement part that you think that is the most prominent part for being a performer? Is it the ability to share these new joints that you found that you're like, whoo, this is gonna light it up? Or is it just I guess it's basically the same thing, isn't it, that I'm asking?
It is, but I mean, I think it has to be both because, especially when you're playing for crowds that are not necessarily totally underground, but some weeks or months are more open to it. Like there's so many times when I've gone in, I've had my like songs that I'm bumping at home, and I'm just like, this is what took me in. I'm like, I'm gonna play this 3 times tonight because I can't help myself. And then you play it once, and it's like wah wah. Or I remember a night when I was like, okay, drum and bass is coming back, and for me, drum and bass and reggae are like huge, huge in my life, and just matter a lot in the way I listen to music. And as we've seen, everything's cyclical, and we've seen, like, I've been excited to see the influence of deep house, and by that I mean true deep house, not the whatever thing people want to call deep house.
Hold on for a second. Could I pause you? Let's say the thought because I want to get where you're going. But has do you ever see the genres pop up now and see the like a genre associated with something and you're like that's not what it is,
That's not techno. That's
but
not
it's being
house. That's
but
like,
it's being
yeah,
adopted en masse.
of
Is
course, yeah.
this so for me? I just got to jump in. All my promos right now, I'm getting promos and the key word that is being used is banger. So if I say the
Banger?
word, yeah, if I say banger to you, what would that mean? Is this a ballad?
How would a banger be a ballad?
is this a funky disco track? I'm asking. I mean, because
A banger is like you've locked into a groove. I mean, sometimes it's to me a very simplistic term to mean boom, 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 boom. It's like, oh, okay, it's a pumped up party track. Okay, that's one interpretation. To me, a banger is more like it's something that catches fire because it catches people's imagination. But it's
ah,
not a no, it's not a ballad. it's
okay.
it's a pumped up party tune um, that is interesting enough to really catch fire on the dance floor.
So
But
can we
other
unfreeze?
people might be like, it's a banger because it has these melodic keys and then a drop, and then this big chorus and then another drop. Or I mean, to me, EDM spoiled so many things, so I'm kind of making fun, but
Is it that EDM got associated with something that was more accessible?
simplistic.
Was it the abbreviation that was it wasn't the abbreviation that was the problem? Electronic dance music. That's
No,
not a
yeah, I think you're right. Like to me, it's simplification, but it was I don't like listen, I don't have a problem with crossover. I'm never like I love pop music. I love good pop music. Stevie Wonder to me is, Stevie Wonder, The Clash. I mean, Massive Attack. This, stuff like that is that's like I believe in melody. I believe in pop music. Even whatever, Rihanna or whoever. I mean, there's some stuff, right? I'm not anti-pop music, but EDM to me, the way it got played out or described or latched onto was just the kind of noise of it. It became a formula. It became like I keep saying big chords. I like melody, but big chords, big melody, big drops, wah 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 wah, and then you know it just the predictable programming of it. Not so interesting, but at the same time brought and brings people to electronic music who might then discover other things. So, it's all useful. It's just, it may not be for you at a time. And you need to find your scenes and your sounds as a DJ, as promoters, and of course as partiers. Um, but a banger in recent years, to me, became associated with EDM, and that just became too simple.
I feel like I got stuck with this term because I've all these promos that are coming my way now from record labels, and it seems to be the choice word to use in the description, regardless of the
So
genre.
what do you find? It's regardless.
It's
So you
regardless of
use
the
the
genre.
example.
So like exactly, it's like the worst situation. And I'm not sure, is it because I'm so old school that I still read the descriptions on these promos? So I'm like, okay, brand new.
You gotta.
Brand new artist
That's
from
what promos are.
Slovakia. Okay, cool. Oh,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
three people that are actually doing it. Oh, all right. They've been working hard for the last year. Let's press play and see what it's about. It's a brand new banger, and I put it on. It's like I don't know. It's slow BPM, and it's like kind of plodding along, and
yeah.
I'm listening to it, and so a frustration comes from me because I'm like, I press play because of the description. Had you just given me right away and told me that it was going to be this, I might have looked at that keyword that you used for the genre and said, that's not for me. I'm gonna move.
What's slow BPM for you?
I mean, it depends. I just released an EP. Denise has got two tracks on it that are both 110 beat per minute on it.
Okay, that's head nodder.
When they're
Okay,
running, it feels like it's strong. They're strong tracks, but sometimes, like for me right now, I'm loving stuff that's a little north of 130.
okay.
Uh, I'm wanting a lot of pep in the step. So I'm looking for that. So right away, I think to myself, banger would be associated with this type of vibe that's happening,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I would tend to agree with you. I'd be thinking like anything below 125 is probably not a banger.
Do you have records that are still sitting in your bag, virtual bag, key session arrangement? Do you have three songs that are sitting with you that are still they're no matter what songs for you, gonna light up the moment? It's not about getting stuck. It's just like it's about I want to use these because these songs are part of my heart and soul.
Wow, it's been almost a year since I played out. So if you'd asked me before now, I would
You
have
had
been
the
able to
answer
answer that no
queued up and
problem.
ready.
Well, I mean, just of course, there's things that I always, always, always. I mean, I'd have to think about that. We'd almost have to put a pause on the conversation and be like, what are the tunes I play all the time? But I mean, it depends on the night. But for example, remix of Jay-Z and Rihanna's "Crazy in Love," like, but the remix.
Who did the
Um,
remix?
ah, I don't, dude. I'm not gonna lie. I have mum brain
I'm,
now,
I'm with
and
you.
my head is not as sharp on names and titles. But I can tell you the color of the 12-inch. I have a blue 12-inch, and so I'm just gonna do a quick thing to make sure something goes away. Um, yeah, I don't. I mean, the other day I was talking about. Uh, it's funny. I name. This is where the point in life and the day. What time is it? Oh yeah, it's almost 10 o'clock. It's almost my bedtime. Um, Things just kind of slip, right?
Of course.
Like JD. I mean, there's Strictly Rhythm stuff. There's just so many things I carry around in my bag all the time. Um, but I'm gonna get back to you on that. And I know I can't video
Would
wise,
you
but
find that a lot of the labels that you were listening to then are still labels that you're listening to now?
hell yeah. Not just labels, but tracks, which is why I'm kind of, I'm embarrassed, but I'm also tired, and I'm not embarrassed to admit that because days are long. um, but yeah, I mean, the thing is that's interesting is that if you dig back in to things that were released, I mean, that's why the rave group that's on Facebook, right? I raved in Toronto in this time period. That group has completely taken off because um, people are so enamored with and connected to what they were doing at that time. Um, I'm very quickly trying to look up an example of, yeah, I mean, people, when they post tracks, I mean, it's a huge range from underground to overground. Um, but it's basically things that were like big at the time that they were going out all the time, right? And that is one of the things that often remains true. I'm going to go back over to you now, back over to Skype. Um, is people stay attached to what they heard that was formative, that kind of changed their lives. But a lot of that music actually is worth going back to. Whether it's, for me, DJ Gregory, or so many things that were played at and loved at Roxy Blue. Um, for me, Ronnie Size, I'll constantly go back to. Um, Seeing Ronnie Size and represent at Industry was like one of the greatest nights of my life. And the music there. Nicolette, Dove Song, another one that came up in the rave group recently, and it's like, wow, it's nice. That's like 92. 92 when that was starting. There's like pseudo breakbeat, like pre drum and bass, pre jungle was happening, which was around the same time that Massive Attack and all this Bristol stuff was happening. I mean, you connect the scene, the dots between the time periods and scenes, and for me, I guess when you ask me that question and I fumble, it's because the what would I play in a club depends a bit on what crowd I'm playing to. But I have my favorites, and I have definitely the albums I go back to. Um, and I think formative music is formative music, and formative dance music has continued to influence what is happening today, which is why I think, for example, say when Disclosure blew up a few years ago, or I made kind of air quotes around deep house, but when 90s house in particular completely resurfaced a few years back with what was happening in house music in terms of the piano stabs, um, even like the spaced out kind of techy, techno, late night stuff. I don't know, everything is cyclical. And when people can absorb what came before them and turn it into something new, it's always exciting, right? Like as a music head, you're always listening, right? Aren't you always like, whoa, this references this and this and this, but it's now? Isn't that
I
exciting?
think it's a DJ's job almost to let someone know that's standing next to you, be like, you know what that sample's from, right?
Yeah, yeah. But if somebody does it well and they take it somewhere new, isn't that cool?
Absolutely. Do you ever feel that perhaps doing what you're doing has you feel like you're in some type of time vortex, time portal, something where time has mixed and melded into each other, or have you felt the length of time that has passed while you've been doing it? Has it been quick? Has it been slow?
Depends on the day you ask me. Um, overall, I mean, overall, we're 80s, 90s. Oh Christ, we're talking, 40 plus, 4+
Yes.
decades. Put it, you know,
Yes, this is an
um,
incredible amount of time.
yeah. And sometimes, I mean, it's weird. I have a couple of weird abilities. One of them is I can walk into a room and almost always tell you, you know, within a percentage, whether it's a massive room or a smaller room, but I am blessed and cursed with the ability to tell you how many people are in a room. As a promoter, that sucks because that's the part that will mess up with a DJ's brain. It's like we have, you know, 100 people in a room that holds 300 or whatever, right? Um, but I also have a brain that, for whatever reason, generally remembers kind of, if not the exact year, pretty close to when something significant to me came out, and you know, can kind of remember the time period and the parties we were going to and whatever. I am definitely starting to slip on names, especially as it gets later into the night. But I I can pretty much always put myself back somewhere because it's visceral. Because I love this music. I love what this music does to people and continue to. Obviously, I wouldn't still be talking about it. And when I think about Toronto history, yeah, it starts to melt to a certain extent, but everything is kind of time stamped in a way, and then it's time stamped and it connects to over here. So just like um, spots on a map, I think timestamps connect, right? Like, and you can really do that in a city like Toronto. You can see the influences. You can see the ways things changed. You can see the significance of when there were a lot of venues or very few venues. You can see what gentrification has now done to the city. So everything is kind of time stamped in that way, but it's easy to forget sometimes. Does that
It
answer that
does.
question?
I feel like I could actually listen to you storytell all night long. I'm curious, if you could throw a party anywhere in the city of Toronto, where would that be?
Hmm. Harborfront without all the rules?
Like the clamshell part of the venue, or like a big top tent, or
The
you
entire
like the
harborfront, the
actual
entire
waterfront
look.
itself? Wild.
Yes, looking, yeah, like with the rooms, with the staging, with the outdoor. I mean, obviously everything has to shut down outside by 11 o'clock in the city, but that's what I'm saying. Like in a
Ideal
fantasy world,
circumstances, great
a
weather,
space like that.
outdoors.
Yeah, and also the inside rooms, so you could program more niche sounds. And because to me it is this whole thing called electronic music is always about bringing communities of people together. It's always been that, and it should be that. It should remain that on different scales. And if you can have a space where you can do that, so that, I guess that's why that comes to mind, right? You've got your outdoor space, you can look at the lake, you can look at the moon. I mean, being outdoors listening to this music is like, you can't top it. But at the same time, having a range of sizes of rooms, plus inside with the art and, you know, the movement where people can kind of choose their own adventure, like that's an ideal. It brings together to me, what made some of the larger raves great, having separate spaces, people being able to wander and connect and hear different sounds, and then being outside is, you know, to me, kind of the ultimate with electronic music.
If someone wanted to plug into a set from you right now, what would be able to do that?
In my basement. I don't know that.
you're
Honestly,
you're you're an
I
artist
was
right
saying to you
now.
before we started. Yeah, you know, it's funny because I one of the things I'm actually about to go through is a throwback thing. Is a year ago I got to play the um, Architecture's New Year's Day event that they do. Architecture's being a very special event. I mean, I'm gonna say Round as a venue. So we did Cherry Bomb at Round monthly. Architectures was there weekly. Lots of different events, underground sounds, queer communities. It was a space in Kensington, and it recently closed. Thank you, COVID. To me, that's been one of the greatest losses. But I did record a number of sets that I did at Cherry Bomb, and I have a recording of the New Year's Day set there that I'm going to go through and make sure I'm happy enough to post. But honestly, I've been pretty lazy about recording sets, lazy in terms of DJ nights, and then also, yeah, I'm a mom to a 6-year-old, now 6-year-old, who requires a lot of time and attention and support, and so I don't have the time straight up to make mix sets for fun, or I'd be keeping people awake and kicking people out of working spaces in our house. Um, so the short version of that is stay tuned, check my Insta and my Facebook. And when I get around to checking out that set from last year, I was pretty happy with that. It was a great place to be able to play. That was actually one of the last parties I got to play until COVID hit, was the Architectures January 1st, 2020, when there was so much hope about 2020. It was a great party because they continue to throw, and will again. Great parties with a really amazing mix of
Have you
people.
done publishing besides the articles in the papers and magazines?
So the book came out, the Then and Now book came out in 2015. I've kept the Then and Now Toronto website running because I want people to have access to it. The book itself, the first two pressings came out and sold out, and then the publisher, who was essentially one woman running a show, she folded in 2016. So unfortunately, the book itself has been out of print since then. I literally get emails, a few a week, every
Does
asking
it
where can I
exist
buy this
like
book,
on a
and
on a site like hardtofindrecords.com? But
like hard. No, well,
except
I
hard
mean,
to find books.
people sell
I'm
them.
saying like a
Yeah, yeah, I get what you're saying. People sell them on eBay and on Amazon for more money than I got paid to actually write the book, which is a pain in the ass to see. But it is in the, I will big plug Toronto Public Library in many, many, many different locations around the city. So if you have a public library card, as we all should, you can actually have it put on hold. So that's one of your best places. Otherwise, looking around sometimes it pops up in used book and record stores. And let's see, it came out in 2015, so we're coming up on, maybe I should chase another publisher and do a new edition, because a lot of clubs have closed since then. The whole idea with Then and Now, obviously, was to chronicle spaces, clubs that existed it was from the mid 70s until The Government was the last book, or the last club covered in the book. And there have been many important venues that have closed since then. So it's about chronicling important spaces, why they're important, what they contributed to the city, and why they closed, what became of them. So it's also about the gentrification of the city, and maybe it's time to do a second edition. So that's kind of in the back burner of my brain as I hopefully gain more steam as my son gets older and I have more energy again. And then I've done a bunch of different projects. I've been doing research and writing for music documentaries, which is super fun, completely up my alley. Right now, I'm working on, and have been working on for a while, on it's basically writing about some queer music venues and artists for a walking tour app that will hopefully launch. We were supposed to launch last year, but
outstanding.
COVID. And yeah, so hopefully that'll happen this spring, summer.
I've uh, I've been absolutely plussed having you with us tonight.
Thank you for putting
No,
up with my
it's
tangents and my
I
long
think
ass
they're
answers.
absolutely fabulous, and so are you. Uh,
That
storyteller.
I get you. I will say, not in addition to dancing in a space with you, playing. I mean, we played fairly different sounds and BPMs, but whenever we've landed on the same bill or in the same space, you are one of the most fun people to play alongside
Thank
with.
you.
So thank you.
Storyteller, promoter, radio host, DJ. Gosh, the list of accomplishments are through the roof. DJ Denise Benson
Don't forget, Mom.
here with us in the utility room. Thank you very much for tuning